This is Have News, Will Read, and I'm Will. The media landscape is filled with garbage, and I'm not just talking about CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, but also other respectable so called straight news sources. It is next to impossible to get unbiased news, and I won't promise you'll get that from me either. But what I can give you is a breakdown of disingenuous reporting, and I can tell you how the article slants the story. Sometimes the slant is explicit, many times it's subtle. But each episode, I'll dive into one of those trusted resources and dig out the valuable story you want with as little of the reporter's bias as possible. This week, we'll take a look at the Business Insider article titled Mike Huckabee Says He's Going to Identify as Chinese in a Tweet as Anti-Asian Hate Crimes Rise. Now, the gist of the article involves Mike Huckabee saying the following tweet: I decided to identify as Chinese. Coke will like me, Delta will agree with my values, and I'll probably get shoes from Nike and tickets to the MLB games. Ain't America great? The article then infers the tweet is in response to major companies criticizing the Georgia voting bill that will change aspects of the state's rules on voting. It then cites examples of 3 companies who criticized the bill, cites examples of 2 anti-Asian crimes in North Carolina and New York. It also cites evangelist Beth Moore criticizing Huckabee's tweet as unchristian, and then rounds out by telling us that they didn't get a comment from Huckabee. So what makes this article trash? Well, the article is first packed with a lot of non sequiturs. And then number 2, it also uses disingenuous phrasing to describe unsubstantiated data in a subtle but arguably hyperbolic fashion. So let's take a look at it. So for number 1, the packed non sequiturs, the article is filled with assorted facts, but these facts are not presented in a coherent way at all. They're just placed in the same piece, and the assertion is that they belong together in the same narrative. This leverages them in a way that creates a subtext that conflates Huckabee's tweet and Huckabee himself with the rise of anti-Asian crimes. From the article, I quote, Huckabee's remark comes amidst dramatically increased anti-Asian hate crimes across the country, end quote. The implication is that these have a relationship, but the article doesn't explain what one has to do with the other. She introduces the anti-Asian crimes without any connection to the state of Georgia, Huckabee, or even the bill. The 2 examples of hate crimes aren't even in the state of Georgia. It just so happens that this phenomenon of anti-Asian hate crimes is happening at the same time of Huckabee's tweet. But you could literally do this with anything. You could say Huckabee's remark comes amidst COVID surges in some states, amidst Biden's calls for increased taxes, amidst Godzilla vs. Kong's monster box office opening. There isn't a connection between these things just because they're happening simultaneously. So placing them together in a headline is definitely deceitful, particularly when you get into the meat of the article, and it's just more of that same tactic. The article just keeps adding random facts and leans on the idea that since they're all compiled in one article, that in itself makes them connected. The article contextualizes his tweet with a 65-year-old Asian woman being yelled at and assaulted while on her way to church in New York City. And then again, they take the tweet and they put it next to a man who used a metal post to trash an Asian American owned convenience store while yelling racial slurs in Charlotte, North Carolina. The whole article is an exercise in calling a person racist without explicitly calling them a racist. The reporter uses this non sequitur writing style again when she wrote, quote, Huckabee is also a Baptist minister, and his tweet comes a day before Easter, one of the highest Christian holy days. I mean, that is a stretch for creating relevance for a story. And the only reason it's included is so that the reporter can include criticism from evangelist Beth Moore, who implies Huckabee's tweet was unchristian. Now, if you wanted to write an unbiased article that wasn't trash, this would have been a perfect opportunity to maybe reach out to Beth Moore and ask her, you think that Mike Huckabee's tweet is unchristian? Could you provide me a quote, an explanation as to why it's unchristian? And then add that into the article. And that would have been a great thing to read, to learn from, to see an argument for. But that probably wasn't the reason why the Beth Moore tweet was included in this article. Again, I would argue that the whole reason this was included was to continue with that subtext that Mike Huckabee is a bad person. So let's take a look at the second issue of the article. And it revolves around the use of unsubstantiated data to justify hyperbolic language. Now, the first item I want to look at is where she writes, quote, which makes sweeping changes to almost every part of the state's voting and election system, end quote. She's talking about the bill here, the Georgia bill. Now, It's very debatable whether it's accurate to describe these changes as sweeping and affecting almost every part of the bill. The language here is very strong and frankly unfalsifiable. I mean, how do you argue almost every part to not almost every part? It really boils down to, well, that's just your opinion. And just your opinion is fine for an editorial, but this isn't supposed to be an editorial. It's supposed to be a reputable, a non-activist news source. I would say you want to aim to not be biased. Now, I'll credit the reporter, of course, for linking to an insider article, a really excellent one that breaks down the bill. I encourage you guys to check it out and look at it. But linking to a good article doesn't excuse your bad, biased reporting in your own. And frankly, most people don't click links, so you still have a responsibility to not write trash. The bigger issue with using this debatable language is what she pairs it with next, the very next line, where she says, quote, civil rights groups have denounced the law and said it suppresses black voters, end quote. This is where I think the piece crosses the line from maybe just bad reporting to activism. There is a conscious decision here to link this type of debatable language with the views of only one side of this bill, the opponents of the bill. This line here doesn't provide any links whatsoever. You could have linked here or included in the story, preferably, a specific civil rights group that has been criticizing this, a link to what they've said against it. When it says that they have the opinion that it suppresses black voters, you could have included in the piece the argument as to how it suppresses black voters, or provided a link to how it suppresses black voters. At which point you probably also want to include, if you're trying to be unbiased, the explanation as to how this bill doesn't suppress it and how it's meant to protect election security. But none of this is included. It's just two things married together with this subtext that Huckabee is racist. We've already included in the subtext that Huckabee said this stuff at the same time anti-Asian hate crimes have been on the rise. It's the whole point of the argument. And now we're saying in the same subtext that not only is he possibly anti-Asian, but he supports a bill that's also essentially anti-black. Now, that's, again, fine for an editorial piece, but not for a straight news source. Now, the second instance that this comes up, this use of data and hyperbolic language, is when she writes, quote, Huckabee's remark comes amidst dramatic increasing anti-Asian hate crimes across the country, end quote. We've already gone over this line. I'm bringing it up again because of the dramatically increasing anti-hate crimes part of that line. So there is a link there for dramatically increasing, because when I read something like that, I go, oh, I wonder how they justify that. Well, the piece that they link to offers no direct data. So neither articles that I have in front of me have direct data that describes what that dramatic increase would even look like. They don't say in 1 year it's this percentage and then the next year it's X, Y percentage, and here's the difference between it. Instead, it links to a site that will include a lot of data, which the second story, the linked story, admits is purely anecdotal data. So it's unsubstantiated data that's being relied upon here. And that is not made explicit in our article, 2 links removed from the actual data. Now, maybe it'll turn out to be true. Like after they get more and more data, it'll be true. But as of right now, as of when the article is written, it's not a known. So to characterize something that is unknown as unapologetically a dramatically increasing phenomenon is very, very disingenuous. So let's talk about improving this article. And again, I'd argue not very hard to do. The foundation of the story is the tweet. The story revolves around why did he tweet this, which really leans on to asking the source, Huckabee, their reasoning. That would have been the strongest thing to do. Get in touch with Huckabee, ask him why. Now, from what I understand, a lot of news sources believe that they just have to attempt to get in touch with the source, and if they don't, it doesn't matter, they'll continue on with the story. And even here it would work. You could probably conjecture about what his reasoning is, but they don't even try to do that in this article. And if you are going to conjecture, you might as well try to steel man their position at least, and not just write an entire article that has this subtext that he's a racist. Now, anyone who is trying to be honest could say something along the lines of Huckabee thought that these notable companies in Georgia have been coming out against the Georgia bill by declaring that the bill contradicts their so called company values. These companies, in Huckabee's opinion, is probably that they're lying or being absolute hypocrites about these values because these same companies do business in China who have literal labor camps. It's not that hard to figure out why he would write this tweet. This is probably his stance if you can't get it from him himself. But there's nothing even close to that in this article. The why is left out completely. It's just the reporter tries to imply through conflation that he wrote this article because he's anti-Asian, because I'm assuming from the reporter's point of view, he invoked the word Chinese in his tweet. There really isn't still a reason to link the anti-Asian crime thing to this story. If you want to include the comment from the evangelist, I still think it requires an explanation on how it's unchristian. That would make the story a little bit more, relevant, I guess. To me, still, the use of that quote is a real big stretch, and it's mainly just an opportunity to say, hey, Huckabee is unchristian, and this evangelist thinks so too. I hope you enjoyed the breakdown of this piece. Do you agree that this article is essentially a hit piece on Huckabee? Do you think it's unfair to tie his tweet to anti-Asian hate crimes? Drop a comment below and let me know. This is Have News Will Read, and I'll see you next time.